Let's start with the Prime Minister's crusade to pass energy or emergency legislation is facing multiple challenges. Pauline Hanson says she's not going to support it because it's going to have zero impact on energy prices. And independent Senator David Pocock, well, of course, he wants more climate concessions tied in before he ticks it off. The Prime Minister defended the policy on Radio National this morning.
Well, it's not a complex package, Patricia. It's a very simple package, which is for a cap on gas. Now, we know that manufacturers out there are doing it tough, that whereas prices were around about the $10 mark, they'd risen in some cases up to $30, $35 was being quoted. I would be stunned, frankly, as well, if the Liberal Party, in spite of their rhetoric, is actually going to vote for higher energy prices.
Well, Peter Dutton managed to score a point today speaking in Toowoomba. Have a listen.
You can't trust this Prime Minister, and he doesn't know, he doesn't have the instinct to make the calls on the economy, and he's had 6 months to come up with a plan, and we find out now that the plan he announced on Friday is not even properly drafted yet. He said in interviews over the course of the weekend and the train wreck press conference he had on Friday that this was a plan that was put together, but now it turns out that they're still drafting it. So I think Australians are rightly shaking their heads at a Prime Minister that promised so much and is delivering so little.
Well, to try and break this down, the Australians Canberra Bureau Chief Dennis Shanahan joins me. Dennis, welcome to Credlin. Listening to both the Prime Minister and Peter Dutton, it seemed to me Peter Dutton understood exactly what this was about and how it was going to work and resonate with the Australian people, and the Prime Minister couldn't really explain his own plan. It's pretty complicated, isn't it?
Well, it is very complicated, and it's not going to be all solved by Christmas with the passage of the legislation. This is part of the complexity. The legislation, as Anthony Albanese says, before Christmas is there about trying to give emergency relief to people on welfare and family benefit and so forth. That's designed to go through via the states, not all the states. Some of the states, not everyone, but some of the people. So that's the fairly simple bit. It's also about the price cap on coal and gas. But there's a much more complicated and what the industry sees as a much more dangerous economic proposition, which will go through into the next year about how they will change the market, the energy market, with the possibility, and this is what the Greens don't like, of providing some sort of compensation for forcing energy producers, coal producers, gas producers, to produce something at below cost. And so there is this real concern that A, the manufacturers will be forced into producing stuff at a lower price than they can, without making any profits, like some sort of public service. And that comes with the climate change threat of what the Greens don't want and David Pocock doesn't want, and that means subsidies going to gas and coal producers. This is a nightmare for the Labor Party. The longer-term nightmare is full of all sorts of practical difficulties. The short term, which is what Anthony Albanese is trying to get through, is to say, right, we're going to introduce this, and anyone who votes against it is voting against cuts in electricity prices. But Cory, we've already seen today, as you correctly pointed out there, in the interview with Patricia Karvelas on the ABC, the Prime Minister has started to use the term that the power bills will be cut by $230. Now, that's not what is going to happen. A, the 230 figure, which we don't really know what it means, is an average figure. And also, it's not a 230 reduction in somebody's power bill. If someone's last power bill was $730, their next power bill isn't going to be $500. It's going to be $1,000, but it would have been much more. This is the argument that what Treasury has suggested is that power bills would have been $230 even higher if the price cap wasn't put in. So what we're actually looking at is not the government saying it's going to cut power bills by $230, it's going to say, oh, it would have been much worse. Now, I noticed the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, used a very different technique in describing the $230. He said it was about the price cap on coal and gas was about taking the sting out of price increases. The Treasurer is being very careful here and not saying what they are promising is a reduction in your electricity price of $230. It's just trying to take the sting out of increases which are already in the pipeline, which are going to continue for some time and probably won't be felt until, that is a good effect, won't be felt till the middle of next year. So I think the government wants to be very careful here. It's selling a very complicated message, and the danger is people will look at it, they'll look at their power bills and say, hold on, this isn't what I expected. So I think that the government has some real practical problems, some real political problems. It will get the legislation through before Christmas. Just as we saw the IR bills pass, they will pass despite coalition objections. And in the meantime, Peter Dutton, next year, if things don't pan out as the government has suggested, will be able to say, I told you so, that this was a bigger problem for the economy than a quick fix to try and lower electricity bills before Christmas, which isn't going to happen.
Yeah, Dennis, the world is littered with examples of where price caps and government regulation in these sorts of market-oriented schemes do more damage than otherwise. But isn't there a risk in this for the Liberals? I mean, we look at the optimistic side, perhaps, of the opportunity for Peter Dutton, but they do open themselves up. They're going to oppose this legislation, and I think that's the right thing to do. But if electricity prices do go higher, Anthony Albanese can say, well, they'd be much higher still if the Liberals were in power because they didn't like it. I mean, it's very hard to argue against something that hasn't happened. Is that a challenge? Do you see that for Peter Dutton and the Liberals?
Oh, yes. Look, Anthony Albanese is a great politician. He's demonstrated that, and he's very good at selling simple messages. He's also very good at using parliamentary power, the power of the executive, the power of numbers in the lower house, and the power of moral suasion through the media. That's why I say his legislation will pass before Christmas, and he will then punish the coalition and say, look, they were against, as he is literally saying it today. If they vote against this, they'll be voting for higher prices. They'll be voting against cutting prices. Now, it will all depend on how the government sells that message and how the Liberals react and how simply this message will be delivered. For instance, the rebates to people on government payments, family benefit, the dole, etc., these have to come through the states. And as the Prime Minister admitted earlier today, well, if you're in the ACT, if you're in Western Australia, if you're in Tasmania or if you're in the Northern Territory, don't expect to get the same sort of rebate, even if you're on this government payment, as if you're in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria or South Australia. What we're going to see are people saying, well, hold on, I didn't get this. They're thinking, I'm a pensioner. Why haven't I got this to help me with my rising electricity bill? This will be part of trying to sell what people are actually seeing. The lived experience is a very difficult message to fight against. If people are looking at their bills, they're going up, they're not getting the rebate through their pension payment or through the state government bills and power bills. And so what's going to happen is that next year, Anthony Albanese will be tested on what people think he promised them and what they've actually received. And this is not going to be a clear picture at all. The $230 is even more nebulous than the promise of 275 cuts to electricity bills during the election campaign. Yes, the Liberals will be punished by Anthony Albanese for being seen to opposing cuts in electricity. But 6 months from now, 8 months from now, Anthony Albanese will be tested by what people actually see is a result of this legislation, which I think will pass before Christmas.
Yeah, I expect you're right. The Greens are going to sign off on it no matter what the cost, and David Pocock will fall into line with a bit of compensation along the way. But I see this as a real opportunity for the Liberals. Peter Dutton hasn't had his mettle tested yet. His messaging, the real challenge is, can he prosecute such a open and shut case for the Australian people that our electricity system has been mismanaged, Labor are failing to deliver on a promise, and now it's all smoke and mirrors, if I can use that pun. So it will be a test of the coalition, won't it?
It will. There's no doubt about that. And look, Anthony Albanese's done very well, particularly on the head-to-head contest between him and Peter Dutton as the respective leaders. But next year, Peter Dutton, I mean, the first 6 months after an election, a leader of the opposition shouldn't really waste their time too much because people aren't listening to the leader of the opposition. They're concentrating on the Prime Minister. We've seen that through the polls. We've seen the Prime Minister do a good political job. He's succeeded in Parliament. And next year, though, Peter Dutton will have his mettle tested, but I think that Anthony Albanese will also be in a position where his honeymoon will be over and the decisions that he has made as Prime Minister will start to be tested as well.
Yeah, Dennis, I agree with that assessment about the last 6 months. The honeymoon is now over, and that's the voice of experience talking there. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you joining me on Credlin tonight.